Hello, everybody. My name is Steve, and I am joined today with Joseph Sale. Joseph, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor and a pleasure and a privilege. I'm excited to be
Wow,
here.
cool. Yeah, it's great to hear because I'm really glad that you accepted the invitation. I'm always surprised when anyone accepts the invitation, so it's good. It's good. I'm glad that you were able to come by. And your book, Dark Hilarity, is highly recommended by my friend Leslie from
Yeah,
Dungeon
she has
Narrative.
been very, very kind indeed in her kind words about the book and recommending it to your good self. And I remember seeing, I was like, somebody's tweeting about my book and I don't know who that is. And that's like an amazing feeling when the book's reach goes beyond the initial point of contact and to somebody else. And then that started a whole conversation between us. And here we are. So yeah, thank you so much for picking it up. It's that's really awesome.
Yeah. Are you getting an echo, or is it just me?
I'm not, but
Okay, I think it may just be me. Well, give me one
I'll
sec.
turn down my
I think I
volume.
might have it open. Oh, I see what's going on. I got it. Sorry about that. Technical difficulty here. Okay, sorry. So, your book, Dark Hilarity, what can you tell us about it for people who aren't familiar with it? How would you describe it?
I always think that authors are like the worst candidate for talking about their own work. We see it as a whole, and it's really difficult to kind of distill it down. So I'm going to try, but I'll probably do an absolutely terrible job. Yeah, it's a kind of coming of age story set in two worlds: the world we know and a dark, fantastical world. And it centers around a kind of jaded rock star of a screamo band in the 90s and these two young women who are obsessed with said band. And like all great bands, they write concept albums that explore kind of mythical worlds in their soundscapes. And what the young girls begin to realize is that these worlds he's describing are perhaps not imaginary, and perhaps they are. It's a recording almost of his experience on these journeys. And I'll try not to say too much more because there are a few surprises in store. Also, I've been told, but yeah, that's my basic pitch. If that is of interest to anyone out there.
Definitely. Mr. Morningstar is here. He says, "Ooh, Dark Hilarity is an excellent title."
Thank you, Mr. Morningstar. It is. Dark Hilarity was kind of inspired a little bit by the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. I like that oxymoron
Mm.
where a divine comedy is used to describe a journey into hell, and albeit it does end in heaven, but I like the idea of playing with that kind of expectation. And I did have a few people say that, oh, I thought this was going to be really funny. And I evilly cackle to myself every time I hear that. Um, but
Did
from a certain point of view, it is funny.
Yeah, it is pretty funny. And David Butcher says, "Go on, you can do it justice in describing the book."
Thank you, Mr.
So,
Butcher.
what were your inspirations when you were writing Dark Hilarity?
Oh, that's a big one. It really felt like a melting pot of a lot of different things. I guess all books are that to an extent. I'd say the main inspirations were my own childhood.
Hmm.
It's set in Bournemouth, where I grew up, or at least initially. The friendship between the two young girls is very much reminiscent of a friendship I had, and the obsession with the bands, the
Mm.
kind of music I love to listen to. So all of that was very, and some of the traumas and stuff they've gone through as well. All of that was very much drawing on. So it initially came from that personal place, but then in terms of the informing the world and some of the journeys they go on, I was very inspired by China Mieville and Perdido Street Station, which is a very large epic of a book, very Mervyn Peake. It is an epic fantasy novel, and I think it kind of intrigued me because it was a very different style of fantasy to Tolkien, and I adore Tolkien. And anyone who keeps up with my blogs and stuff knows I'm always raving about the great man. So I don't want to do him down, but it's great when you discover kind of new forms of fantasy and somebody approaching that in a different way. And then I guess the last thing would be Grady Hendrix's novel, My Best Friend's Exorcism, which is an incredible horror novel. There is humor in that book, actually, but also some real horror, and the kind of decimation and destruction of the friendship, and then the rebuilding of it is so well done. I think that book really shook me to my core. It showed me a kind of way of writing in a very real and grounded setting, but with supernatural elements that was incredibly inspirational and I hadn't really seen before. So yeah, those are kind of the three main influences if I was going to focus on the main ones.
Wow. So Tolkien was a big influence on, or still is a big influence on you.
Yeah, I keep coming back to him. And no writer is perfect, but I think his prose is incredible. When you really start digging deep into it, especially, for example, he uses speech rhythms to indicate states of mind in really clever ways. When Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo, he says, "It was only yours, saved by unhappy chance. It could have been mine. It should be mine. Give it to me." So you see long sentence, shorter sentence, shorter sentence, shorter sentence, right? Goes down to a point. And in the book, you don't get this in the film. They cut a lot of it for dramatic effect. But in the book, when Frodo finally puts the ring on at Mount Doom, he says, "I have come now to the place I was meant to. But now I do not choose to do the thing I came here to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." And so that's that same speech pattern that is indicative of addiction. And I think that is the incredible power of Tolkien. He was a linguist. He studied language. He spoke many languages and obviously invented them as well. And so that kind of command gives it an archetypal kind of power that has endured. And then the whole Jungian element, which is really interesting because he also denied a lot of the kind of allegory and Jungian. He also said it wasn't based on World War II, but I mean it blatantly is. Again, authors are not great authorities on their own work. I'm interested in what you think of Tolkien, though, Steve. I've rabbited about him enough, probably.
I sadly haven't read his books yet.
Ah.
It is high on my list, so I plan to get to it early next year. So yeah, I've been holding out, but I have to start reading those books. And The World According to Jay is here. He's probably,
excellent.
I think he's working from home today. He should be working. Get to work.
He's a maverick. He's allowed.
Yes, he's a rebel. I recently listened to a snippet of an interview you did, and I forget the other author's name, but you were discussing how the written word is like magic. So what can you elaborate on that? How is the written word magic?
Yeah, thank you. That's really kind of you. And that was S.C. Mendez, I think, who was a phenomenal author. I would highly recommend his book, The City, to anyone. Deeper and deeper it goes. It's very Dante as well. And yeah, we talked a lot about the connection between magic and writing, and there has always been that connection. And words, what is it? The quote from Alan Moore, which is, "Words give the means to meaning, and with that comes the enunciation of truth." So our words can have an incredible power over the human mind. And of course, the narratives we tell ourselves. My wife is a clinical psychologist, so which is very useful as a writer to draw on my knowledge and experience. And of course, one of the fundamental things that any decent psychologist or therapist will do is try to get to the heart of what is our self-narrative. And it is amazing how, when you start analyzing the words we use to describe ourselves and to describe others, how these narratives emerge. And it is amazing often how debilitating they are. And it is amazing how much is within our control that we don't necessarily realize. So once we start to use our words more precisely, and of course, writing can be this fiction in particular can be a way of like rewriting narrative. So I talk a lot about when we're drawing from personal experience in writing, with fiction, with diary or autobiography, like you kind of have to tell it as it is. But with fiction, you have an opportunity to retell that story and rewrite that narrative. And this can be a tremendously healing experience. It's where like the catharsis comes from, the emotion. So all in all, that's a poor summary of what is such a huge, colossal topic. We could spend 2 hours on that alone. But yeah, to me, that is what the power that language has to rewrite the narratives that are in our minds. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, you know, when I was listening to that, I heard it's a form of magic, and then as you were discussing it, I never really thought of it that way. But after I listened to it, I thought, well, it is almost a form of magic because there's so many things you could convey with words.
Mm. And
And
the ancient Egyptians had a belief that their language was, because it was a pictographic in part as well, the word was directly connected to what it was describing. So the signifier and the signified were one. So to speak the name of something was to invoke it. And obviously to curse somebody was to literally curse somebody. And we all have had that creepy experience, haven't we, where we've said we've maybe been in a moment of anger, and a moment of lost control, or maybe you're a better person than I am, but you know, where you say, you know, you say something nasty about somebody, and then that nasty thing happens. Or alternatively, like where you wish for something, and you wish for something so hard, and that person calls you just when you were never expecting, or they show up at your door. And we do have this strange power to bring things into being. So yeah, it can be actually quite scary when you start to really believe in it and believe in the power of your own words. You start to second guess yourself, I guess, a bit, and worry that you're going to bring things into being by uttering them, right?
It's funny you say that because in the last couple of years or so, I've tried to not say things out loud that I don't like. If I'm trying to avoid something or I don't want something to happen, I just try not to talk about it, to not put that energy out there. I just wanted to keep it,
Yeah.
you know, I'll cross my fingers and hope it doesn't happen.
I mean, we have that experience with the algorithm, right, of Facebook, and you know, that always seems to be anticipating our needs. But it happens outside of the social media world as well, where we, as you say, you put something out into the universe, and then suddenly it's like, oh, here's the thing you wanted, and then you're like, oh, actually, I don't want the thing. Now it's arrived at my doorstep.
Yeah, it's different when it's reality. It's not something you were wishing for or longing for. And Jay is not in the Jay is in the office today, but we won't tell anyone. We'll keep it safe with us.
Naughty boy.
Yeah, and Mr. Morningstar said, I came across a quote that reading is just staring at dead trees and hallucinating for hours. It's tongue in cheek, but also conveys the power of words.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's perfect. And yeah, if you tell somebody to picture a white rabbit, they picture a white rabbit, right? It may look slightly different for each person, but you can put that image into their head, and you can do it without even uttering it aloud, which is like a further form of magic, to actually be able to set it down forever in concrete. Yeah, brilliant quote. I'll have to find out who said that.
Yeah, that is a really great quote. Josh is here. Josh says the only author whose fantasy I've enjoyed more than Tolkien is Gabriel Kay, and he has a Tolkien connection. He assisted Christopher Tolkien with editing The Silmarillion, which I haven't read. More authors to put on the list. Yeah,
that's awesome. I have not read Guy Gabriel Kay, so I shall check him out. I have read the Silmarillion, and it's one of those books that is renowned for being quite boring, and it's a shame because Tolkien himself said it wasn't finished. He didn't really get it needed a second draft, and so we have a first draft. We have a kind of fragment of maybe what it could have been, but this is the problem with posthumous publication, unfortunately.
Yeah. That is too bad that it was released if he wasn't finished with it yet. But
it happens to a lot of his work.
and David Butcher says the Similarian is a different read, a challenging read, but rewarding.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So, do you write fantasy books too? Because I've looked at your I looked up all the books and I thought they were all horror, but have you written fantasy as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've always mixed the two as well, and sci-fi as well. I tend to mix all three, and I think that's been a blessing and a curse because it's attracted some really diverse and interesting readerships to me. But also, of course, you don't have that very clear branding where you're like, I do this type of book, and you know what you're getting. Sometimes you're getting an epic fantasy, and sometimes you're getting quiet horror, and sometimes you're getting a sci-fi, something really speculative. And so, yeah, I've always been across genre and enjoy. And The Black Gate is the ultimate kind of example of that, where the first book is like a crime novel in space with cosmic horror, and the second book is like a sword and sorcery fantasy with cosmic horror in space, and the genres just keep stacking up really until you get to the third book. But I'm really interested in how genres can intersect in interesting ways, and I love it when authors, like a really good author at doing this is Colton Mellick III, who's a Bizarro author. And you read his books, and they're outrageously kind of he's made a whole career out of splicing genres almost and just completely disregarding all the rules of genre. And they're so energetic and interesting because he is kind of fearless in crossing these boundaries and avoiding these formulas. Probably, if I had to recommend one book by him, I'd probably recommend Biomelt, which is Biomelt. Amazing book. That's a book that is so ahead of its time. It's like becoming more and more relevant now, I'd say, especially with like how it explores gender and identity and all those kind of things as well. But yeah, but the best thing about Biomelt is there's a character in it who's a serial killer called Porn Eyes, and he's called Porn Eyes because he's watched so much holographic pornography that it's been seared into his irises. So it's just like pornographic movies are just burned into his eyes. It's incredible. Like, how do you come up with something like that? Yeah, it's an absolutely sensational book, and it's full of just wacky ideas like that. So I've always enjoyed genre crossovers, and I would definitely encourage writers to go where their heart is and explore, and not necessarily feel bound to one just because they started in horror or they started in fantasy.
Do you think genres are becoming a thing of the past, with everything being changed? Even in our everyday lives, things are being twisted and bent, and traditions are being challenged, and things are evolving quite quickly. Do you think genres are a thing of the past in the next, I don't know, 10, 15 years?
What a question. That's an amazing question. I'm probably not qualified to answer that in a way, but no, yeah. Who is qualified to answer that? I mean, it's interesting because I feel like the traditional publishers and in another category like filmmakers, producers, kind of want genre, and they kind of insist on genre almost. So long as they continue to insist on it, it will be increasingly difficult always for people like Mellick, who is he's published with a Razorhead Press, and they're quite big considering what they publish, but they're very niche and indie really. It's always going to be difficult for authors doing that. I mean, even if you look at someone like Clive Barker, who is has not got a single genre, he's doing all sorts of crazy things. He's way more mass market than someone like Mellick, and has sold, tens of millions of books probably. But has he sold as many books as Stephen King? No. So there's always a kind of balance there. I wonder, it's a really interesting prospect. Like, what would happen if some of those walls came down, and if some bigger publishing houses maybe tried their hand, at experimenting. But I think the problem is a lot of their business models kind of work backwards. They look backwards and they say, what worked in the past, we'll do that again. And then sometimes they get lucky with some new thing. And then that becomes the thing. Like, Game of Thrones exploded and became this huge thing. And then suddenly everyone wanted that type of fantasy. Everyone wanted this grim, dark, medieval setting. And now I kind of feel like it's on the wane, especially after the ending of the TV series. So then it's like this desperate attempt. What's the new thing? And so they tried with Westworld. They pumped as much money as they could into Westworld to try and make that the new Westerns. Westerns are coming back. And sometimes these attempts work. If you put enough money into things, sometimes they kind of do take off. And I know in the indie scene, there's been a lot of great Westerns and splatterpunk Westerns, and there's a press. Is it Weird Punk are doing a whole series of Westerns? I think Weird Punk.
I think I forget what press is doing, but I've seen a few books. Yeah.
Yeah. So and Steve Stredd and Dave Sodergren published an amazing the Navajo Nightmare, tongue twister that, but a brilliant novella, Western novella horror. So things do kind of, but I definitely think the need to put it into a genre, I guess, it's that sales thing of if you like this, you'll like that. And so I guess so long as that exists, we may never entirely get rid of genre. It's interesting to say, I'm talking way too much, but it's interesting.
That's good. I'm glad.
The one last thing I would say on that is one of the things I teach when I'm editing and doing writing coaching is the 5-act structure. And what's interesting about this model, and I think different to any other kind of model that's out there, is that it's not genre specific. It's story specific. It is all stories can kind of benefit from and operate under this kind of these bones that underlie everything. So once you start looking at stories that way, it becomes very liberating, and you don't start to feel hemmed in by genre. But a lot of writing advice, writing craft books that you see are like, when you're telling your horror story, in chapter 1, you need to introduce the monster. And in chapter 2, it's very much tied to that genre. Whereas the 5-act structure, which isn't really truly mine, I use it and promote it, and I've developed courses around it, but it doesn't belong to me because Shakespeare was using it. So you can't copyright something like that. It's too old to own in the modern world. But I find that really interesting, because then you start to see stories in a different way, and you start to realize how genres intersect as well. And it does allow you to maybe challenge on genre tropes a little bit more. But it is interesting, definitely, to see genres shift and change and get broken down and incorporated into other genres as well. Like horror is really being incorporated into thrillers in film, I feel. I don't know if you sounded too pleased about that.
No, yeah, I think it's I think it's good. I think the book industry almost reminds me of the music industry from the mid 1990s, because things are starting to change. I feel like there's some momentum coming on the indie scene, and I'm not sure if the publishers are quite ready for it yet. I just see an explosion of something is going to happen, that people are going to start reading these indie books, that it's going to just explode.
Totally. You're absolutely right. And I think it kind of started when self-publishing started. It was so taboo, wasn't it? It was so you only self-publish, you're not a real writer, and those are kind of falling away quite a bit. And one reason is the tools that are available to indie authors can make your book look so professional. Most people can't even tell the difference anyway. That's one major reason. I think as well, people are beginning to realize that traditional publishing is quite arbitrary, really. Were some of the greatest was Homer traditionally published? No, he wasn't. His work was just so good it survived and was continually reprinted by whoever could get their hands on it, essentially. And he wasn't traditionally published, neither was Shakespeare. You know, he was putting on plays, and then somebody thought, these are so good, we must compile them. And in fact, it was his, you know, posthumous publication of his work by the main players and friends who formed his acting troupe. So, you know, this idea, and I had a conversation with editor Dan Coxon, who created the Shadow Booth series, a really interesting weird fiction kind of series. And I met him at a book launch, and he's a lovely guy. But he was saying, we were saying that if Lovecraft was alive today, he would be self-published. No one would take a chance on him. And so when you look at it in that context, why shouldn't people self-publish? And it's great to see self-published people like Eric LaRocca and Ross Jeffrey and many others smashing it, you know, selling huge numbers of books and making careers out of it. And, you know, in even me, and I don't really, you know, sell massive volumes of books, but I'm making a living doing what I love. So when you read like that, you're absolutely right. The change is coming. And I think traditional publishing is probably quite scared of that fact, really.
Yeah, I think so. And Fit to Be Read is here. He said, I gave up on Tolkien years ago because I couldn't, because I tried it to, like a 7th grade or something. Oh, too young. Sorry. I never went back to it. Yeah, I think I tried in around 7th grade as well. And I just haven't come back to it, but I have been hearing a ton of great books or a ton of great things about it that I just feel like I have to read it. It's just something I have to read. And book reading, coffee drinking is here. I think you're exactly right. Publishers never want to take risks and just try to peddle the same thing over and over again. Reminds me of what happened to dystopian in YA a few years ago.
What a perfect example. Yeah, you're bang on. And we're kind of not even talking about dystopian YA anymore, right? Well, we are now, I guess, literally, but that whole thing kind of went away. You know, those Maze Runner and Divergent and those kind of ones, but it kind of all went away very quickly because they're always trying to bottle that lightning a second time, and it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I think they just, you know, the Hunger Games, and there was a few other ones that were really popular, and they just stuffed as much of that type of material out until nobody watched it anymore, and then they moved on to something else.
I'm wondering when it's going to happen with Marvel. You know, I think they're really trying to mix up the formula now because they know we are all so just oversaturated with superhero movies. You know, I'm not a snob. Like, if you enjoy Marvel, you enjoy Marvel. But and I used to read the comics as a kid, so like, you know, I have a connection to it. Do I prefer the original Sam Raimi's Spider-Man's? Yeah, I do. You know, I am that guy. But you know, it's just pure oversaturation, and I'm. What are they going to do to break past that? I don't know. It's interesting.
That makes 2 of us. Yeah, I'm not a. Yeah, so you're not alone. And Mr. Morningstar says self-publishing books could end up mirroring what indie creators have done with podcasts and YouTube channels that outperform traditional TV, radio, and movies. And that is a fantastic point. That they could start doing that. And the reason I love self-published books and indie books is because it's what the creator wanted. Whether it works or it doesn't work, or I enjoyed it or I didn't enjoy it, it's still what they wanted to make, and it's still their vision, and not through 5 different editors and people who are saying you have to change this to be this because this is what's hot right now, or this is what people really enjoy. So that's why I really love the indie scene, the self-publishing scene.
Totally. And I do know 1 or 2 authors who got traditional deals who were asked to change the ending of their book and essentially the whole message and meaning of the book. And at that point, I'm like, it's easy to say, oh, I wouldn't compromise. But if they say, well, we'll pay you $250,000, then okay, well, you know, I might decide that for my, you know, my family's future, it's worth swallowing my pride and kind of taking the money. But I do like to think that indie authors have this kind of integrity. And I remember I went to a talk actually, and it was, I can't remember her name now, which is really bad, but you know, she was a really interesting indie author, and she'd sold 5 million books self-publishing on Amazon KDP. And they all the major publishers made her offers, and she just said no because I make more money doing it this way, and I can do exactly what I want to do. I'm not obligated to you and your agenda and being locked into a 10-book contract.
Mm.
And there are, I won't say his name, but there's one quite famous author, British author, who had a deal with Penguin, and basically on the last book just had enough. They weren't paying him any money. It was a terrible contract, and he had books in every Waterstones in the UK. Like, my parents owned his books, and I was like, I know this guy. Like we're Twitter buddies and stuff. And so, I had this sense that he was this huge success and doing really well, but no, they'd scammed him on a contract, and so he now has gone self-published and he's doing a lot better.
Oh, wow.
So it's it's a real world of sharks out there, and it is really, I think, important that publishers start learning these lessons, that authors have other options now, so you better treat them right, basically.
I'm waiting for Stephen King to self-publish. That's what I'm waiting for.
He basically does, though, right? I don't get the feeling many people say no to anything he suggests. Like, I get the feeling he's like, here's my next book, do the technical bit. What one would give to see behind closed doors there and see what that process was like.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, like you said, I'm sure he doesn't get a whole lot of no's when he's bringing something to the table. Just, okay, Mr. King, well, we're right on it, and 2 weeks later, it's a book. Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny because the contracts, and like we talked about a minute ago, the music industry from the 90s, it was on the cusp of this big collapse, basically. Now we're still seeing it now with digital music, but the record contracts remind me of book contracts, like we were just talking about. With you make it and you sign this contract, and then you don't get paid any. You're broke because that you get screwed out of your work. So that's And the flip side to that is, of course, that Amazon is where I go for my self-published books, my indie books, because they're Amazon KDP. And so the unfortunate side of it is that Amazon is this big monster of a company that just owns so much real estate, and they have so much power over it. I'm hoping there'll be a competitor to Amazon who would focus on books and work their way up. But I'm not sure if that'll happen with Amazon just being so massive.
Yeah, it's really tough, isn't it? And I definitely went through that moral dilemma. I was very anti-Bezos and anti the way that Amazon employees were treated in the warehouses. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to avoid Amazon, but I realized that really I couldn't have a future as an indie author without them. And to be fair, they have paid me more generously than other self-publishing presses that I've used. In fact, I had a huge Ross Jeffrey had the same issue. There was a self-publishing press we used, completely screwed us over, collapsed, lost huge amounts of royalties from them. It was really dreadful betrayal. Whereas Amazon, it's clinical, but it's been incredibly reliable. The payments are general because they've bought all the best printers. They can give you like a really good cut on the book. So it's a tough moral dilemma. You don't want to support them, but you're also like, if I want to actually do this credibly and have a future doing this, then 90% of people go to Amazon. So I've kind of got to play that game a bit. But there are some interesting homes emerging, like Godless is a new app that is specifically focusing on horror, and they publish a lot of stuff that Amazon bans, which is really extreme horror. It's really fascinating. So I think things are slowly emerging. There was another app as well, Novelic, or maybe it was called, I can't remember now, but it looked like that was doing quite well and authors were migrating to it. But a lot of these are digital only. They can't keep up with the print on demand. And I know I'm probably in the minority on this, but I've always had this weird quirk that I sell way more paperbacks than Kindle books. And I've never met another author who has that. For some reason, the type of people who like my books just seem to want a physical copy. I have no idea why. Maybe some expert data analyst could break that down. But
Yeah, I think every author I've ever talked to has told me they sell a lot more ebooks than paperback. That's interesting. That's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Josh says, "Do indie authors use crowdfunding sites such as Kickstarter? I'm more familiar with the gaming scene, but that's become a great avenue for independent designers."
Mm.
There's a
I've
couple
used
I've
it.
seen. Oh, you
Yeah.
have?
Yeah, I used it for my book Across the Bitter Sea. I didn't know what the hell I was doing really. I also used it to try and fund a publishing venture that I did ages ago called 13 Dark, which was like, which was a real shame it didn't quite kind of work out. We produced something, and I'm really proud of the authors that I published, but I would have done so many things differently if I could do it again. But you have to learn these lessons the hard way. And crowdfunding is tricky because there's always more costs than you think, and you may think you've calculated correctly how much it costs to produce a book, but the time and effort to send out all those books and all that stuff, it really, by the end of it, you're often at a loss, really. I definitely agree, Josh, on the gaming scene, because I actually also own another thing I do. You've got to have all these pillars in your Parthenon. Is I own a company that makes role play games. So
Hmm.
we very new startup, and we've just started with this role play game called Desecrated Empires. But one of the big things that we discussed was, are we going to go the Kickstarter route? Because we saw games like Kingdom Death and these really epic kind of RPG board games were doing, some of them were raising millions.
Oh, wow.
Really impressive performances. But in the end, we thought, well, our game is much more around selling a book. It's all in the book. You don't need a board and models and all that stuff. So we thought, well, what money would we really be asking for from a Kickstarter? It's not the right time to do that. Maybe later if our empire expands and we have miniatures and all that kind of stuff. But I definitely think a lot of gaming venues can get success on Kickstarter, but publishing, I'm not quite so sure the format is as geared up for it. But Patreon is. I'd definitely say Patreon is a really good way forward for indie authors, and there are some really big authors who use it, like N.K. Jemisin, and I use it as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's a better tool for authors, possibly.
Interesting. And Mr. Morningstar says, "Did anyone else hear that Amazon was going to cut back or stop altogether on allowing libraries to rent out Kindle books for free?" I hadn't heard that.
I've not heard that either, but it does not surprise me.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
would surprise me. That'd be unfortunate.
Are you a big libraries man, Steve?
I should be more, but I have this weird thing about borrowing things. I don't like to borrow things, and so
Yeah.
I always worry I'm going to drop it, or I'm going to bend the cover, or I'm going to do something. So I always have uh, this weird feeling like I have to be extra careful with it, and then I'm very particular about the condition of my books anyway. But I just always have this weird quirk about borrowing things. So I should use it more
Yeah.
often. But I have used there's an audiobook. I forget the name of the app, but you can rent or you can borrow audiobooks.
Oh,
And so
amazing.
I have used that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very similar. I should use the library more, but I think I was always a secondhand bookshop guy. So yeah, I'm definitely think opportunities for people to get books cheaply is
Mm.
really, really important, or for nothing in the case of a library. But like you, I'm like, I want to own it, and I want to
Yeah.
thumb it, and I want to put tabs in it, and I want to
Yeah.
kind of like have my way with it. But
Yeah.
you don't get to do that when you borrow from the library, and the choice is more limited. And I don't like the time pressure either of feeling like, oh, I have to read this in X time. I'm a bit of a collector, as you can see. Well, you can't see that well, but sometimes things have got to sit on the shelf for a little bit.
Yeah. Get to marinate a little bit sometimes. Book
Mm.
reading, coffee drinking says sounds like something evil Amazon would do. Yeah. Oh yeah, and Fit to be Read agrees. Sounds like an Amazon like thing to do. And Priscilla's here. Hey Priscilla, our library lets us borrow ebooks through Hoopla, which is way cool. Oh, okay. I haven't heard of
Mm.
Hoopla.
borrowing ebooks is like a whole realm that I've not yet entered into, which is really cool. I did used to own a Kindle, but it broke and I never replaced it. So I tend to like use my laptop, which is not like ideal. It's not a very pleasant kind of reading experience on the laptop. Already spend enough time on the laptop. I don't need any more. But yeah, that sounds really cool. I imagine, especially if you read a lot of indies, because the indie release schedule is bonkers, right? I mean, a book is coming out every day.
Yeah,
So
that's insane. Someone gave me a number one time. It was something astronomical. It was almost it was hard to just to imagine that many books being published every day, but it was just an insane amount. I forget the number, but it was an insane amount of books every day being published, which is great. I mean, but it's tough to also get your book out there and get attention if you aren't already a well-known author or you don't have a following. It's tough.
That links as well, I think, to a real change in how we authors' careers, because like back in the day, you could publish one book every 3 years and have a living, but now the number is like 3 books a year, almost minimum. I know I have done 3 books this year, and it will be 4 by December. And to be fair, I had a productive lockdown and a few things backed up, so I didn't write all those books this year, and that would be truly insane. But you know, and I see a lot of indie, like Steve Stredd, like that man is a monster. He just writes 10 novellas a year, it feels, and I love him for it. I love his work, but you kind of have to do that to remain in the public eye almost, and to build momentum. And there's obviously a psychological danger there of burnout, but as you say, it's also kind of, it can work against you if you put so much. I always worry that my readers can't keep up with the speed of my writing. So, you know, Dark Hilarity is a big old book, and it's complex, it's in multiple parts, and there's a time jump. And so it's not a book that you kind of bang out over a weekend. It is a book that requires some time to get through it. And those are I like big, as you can see again from my shelf, like big chunky books. I do like that, so I like writing them as well. And you know, if I do 4 of them a year, no one's gonna read that much content. So it is a tricky balance, and it's kind of a unique position for our generation or our society. You know, I think authors didn't have this problem before, so we'll see how that goes.
Now that you mention it, I wonder how much that has to do with our attention spans now compared to what they were 20 years ago, because I wonder how much social media and this instant gratification type of technology, and you know, we're so used to wanting things now and having it at our fingertips. If we want a movie, we can stream it. If we want music, we can download it. If we want everything is at our fingertips. So is that part of it, you think, that our attention spans are shorter, so you have to stay you have to keep up with those short attention spans?
That's a really interesting point. I think that's quite, I connected some of those things, but not all of them. I think that's a really interesting observation, because on the one hand, I'm always loath to make any brushstroke, sweeping statement about a generation or a society or whatever, and it's. But I think you're right. Social media must have impacted on our attention spans, and I feel it myself. I also think it's to do with the way things are taught. I think that people are not given the tools to break things down in the same way that they were. And so, you know, this creates this kind of barrier to, you know, for example, like a lot of people, I'm reading War and Peace at the moment, literally reading War and Peace. And it was recommended to me by my good friend, Krista Wachowski, who's an amazing writer, and everyone should check her out. She's another level of writing, really, another great indie author. And a fantastic friend as well. And I'm very versed in the kind of very versed is a bit arrogant to say, but I'm more versed in the kind of classical literature and the Greek and Roman epics and that kind of thing. She's really knowledgeable about the Russian novelists and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and those kind of people. So, and I have no knowledge of that. That was like an intellectual blind spot for me. So we kind of swapped and exchanged over time. So I started reading War and Peace, but what does everyone say? Oh, it's really long. Oh, that's a really long book.
Yeah.
Nothing about the sweeping majesty of the prose. Nothing about the crazily developed characterization. Just some of the most three-dimensional characters you'll ever encounter in fiction. I'm blown away. Like I can't put the book down. And it is 1,200 pages long, and it is a whopper. But it's I find it quite accessible, which I didn't expect. So I think we kind of approach things the wrong way sometimes. And I'm coming back to what I was saying about how things are taught. A lot of people, if you ask them to kind of say like what time period something came from, they wouldn't say. It's just, oh, that's really old, right? And whether that's 1920s or 3000 or 700 BC, which is like Homer, there's no sense of like, what's the timeline here? What caused what? And I was really lucky because I had some really fantastic teachers when I was growing up, and they gave me that grounding. And of course, one can't know the whole of one's human history or one particular culture's history, but I think that if we built people up in a way where they really understood the like cause and effect and the dominoes, then you start to create a picture. And the thing is, this isn't just about literature. It's about like who you are, who we are as a culture. How did we arrive at this point? And that's really important. And then from there, we can rebuild. So I think, the whole way that literature is like approached, Shakespeare, oh, the language is really difficult, it's really old. Shakespeare's modern English. The opening line of Hamlet is, who's there? And especially when you see Shakespeare performed, of course, then the language is broken down even further into a more accessible kind of format. So I think rather than making things out to be difficult, we should instead focus on why these things have endured, why they are great. And of course, that also allows us to challenge. And as you said at the start, people are questioning and opening up the conversation about, is this actually good? And there are, for me, James Joyce's Ulysses is a classic thing where I'm like, that book is massively overrated. We can probably put that to the side now. But like, so I'm playing devil's advocate with myself. But overall, I think the whole approach to literature could definitely change. But having said all that, if you're an indie author and you write a stonkingly good novella and it's pacey and it grabs someone's attention, then massive kudos to you, because that isn't easy to do. And if that is a strategy that then warms people up to you, and then they go and they read your huge epic 900-page epic that's like the work of your own soul, then that's a good thing too. So I guess a balance overall.
That's a good point. And Nikki from Dark Between Pages is here. She says, yo, and saying hello to Joseph.
Yo, Nikki, thank you so much for showing up. It's always a pleasure. She is so nice.
Oh, yeah, Nikki's awesome.
She's been so generous. Mr. Morningstar. That's such a cool name, Mr. Morningstar.
It's such a cool name. Yeah.
I wish I had it myself.
Yeah.
I shall have to kill him and take it from him.
Hopefully his name drops. Yeah, pick it up. So I did see, and you mentioned the RPGs that you're working on, or the games. And I saw a message on your site about Dead World.
Oh yeah.
So what can you tell us about
that? This is only a proof copy. It's this big bad boy here. I don't know. I didn't do lots of posts about it in my Twitter feed, because I thought, well, most of the people who follow me are interested in fiction, and this isn't really fiction. There are loads of stories in it, but so I didn't want to like contaminate, and I recognize not everyone who reads my novels will necessarily be interested in reading a game. But yeah, it's a kind of new take on role play games. It has a city building RTS strategy kind of element to it, but most interestingly, it has a competitive element to it, which is like unheard of really in role play games. We played this campaign via it all happened because of lockdown, where I've been working on this game for a while, and it was just a thing I had myself, and me and my friends played, handwritten or bits of it typed up, and nothing official. And then we had this huge group of friends. There's 9 of us, and so I was like, 8 people on a Zoom call playing D&D is way too much. So I divided them into 2 teams of 4. I started them at different corners of the map. And then I did 2 sessions a week. And what happened was they were inhabiting this world simultaneously. So one group of adventurers, for example, destroyed a village. And the other adventurers later on turned up at that village and found only destruction. They found the evidence of what the other party had done and began to track them. And from there, it just escalated and went completely bananas. And they used the mechanics of the game in the most incredible ways. Like, one guy faked his own death. Like, one of the teams shot him with a blunderbuss and he appeared to die, but it was actually only an illusionary version of himself he'd sent away from his actual body, like an astral projection. And so, like, later he showed up and the 2 met again and the guy just like went white. It was incredible. And there was all this conspiracy and messaging each other on the forums. It was like an amazing experience. I'd never had anything like it. And then once we were done, we were like, this is new. Like, we need to put all of this in proper writing. And so the four of us who kind of were a driving force of it joined together, and we formed a limited company, and we created this book, and it's 624 pages long, and it's got art in it, and it's kind of epic. And well, again, you know, epic and undigestible, which is how I like it. But yeah, we think it's really cool. We're allowing everyone to download it for free, the digital version, from our website, which is deadworldrpg.co.uk. You just leave your name and email in the form, and then you get a free copy. It's like 30 megabytes to download those, so be prepared for that. And then we have a paperback version as well for people who like the physical copy, as I said. And as per my usual, the physical copies have outdone the free downloads, which just seems impossible, but that seems to be the law of my universe. So there we go.
Yeah, for things like that, though, I'd like to have a a hard copy handy to flip through and to put like we mentioned before, to put tabs on and put little sticky pads so you can know this rule, what's this rule, what's that rule, just to have it handy.
Are you a big RPG yourself?
I have friends who've played, but I'm afraid to get into it because I know it'll be bad. So I've been holding out, but it was something I would like to try sometime, but I just haven't yet.
Well, a space is always open, my friend, on the dark side. Among the killers and thieves and deceivers that make up most of the adventuring parties, there are no heroes on this side of the table.
Sounds like my kind of game. That sounds like and it's funny because you said during lockdown, and there's so many things that people have done during lockdown. And looking back now that things are starting to open up a little bit, but looking back, it's interesting to see how people handled that whole time period and what they did with their time and how they coped with what was going on. It's really interesting.
That's the thing, and it's in no way do I want to belittle or minimize the kind of suffering, and some people went through some really bad stuff, but I think in life, we are sent these huge trials, and we have to find ways to get the good out of it. And that's obviously more difficult for some than others, but I think a lot of people did come out of that with a new perspective on life, a new appreciation for certain things. And some people got busy, man. Like, got suit. I mean, I feel like I use mine pretty well. But I mean, some people, learned whole new languages and did all crazy stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating period, and it shows what an incubation period can do. And I mentioned Shakespeare earlier, but famously Shakespeare wrote King Lear during the plague, where he had nowhere else to go. So these incredible creative works can sometimes come out of these isolations, these moments of interior reflection, I guess, if we're brave enough to look inward, as we're being invited to. Then yeah, I think astonishing things can occur. As you say, yeah. I mean, we'll be thinking about and writing about this for decades, I think. Yeah.
Definitely. And Josh said, I started playing D&D this year in a couple of weeks, and in a couple of weeks, I'll be starting to DM my first campaign.
Awesome.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, but so rewarding. I think DMing is one of the most rewarding things you can ever do. So good luck to you, Josh, and full power to your elbow. And I hope it goes well. And if you want to, our rule book it's got its own kind of rule system, so I won't try and sell it to you. But yeah, if you ever get curious, then you're welcome to download it, and it might give you some. It's got bestiary in it at the back, which I think is always very useful for a DM. But then again, the great fun is creating your own monsters and creatures. So.
Priscilla says, King Lear is an awesome story. I didn't know it was written in isolation.
Yes. And I think I didn't initially know that either, but once I knew that, reading it again or seeing it again, it kind of makes sense. There is a real kind of claustrophobia, and Lear going out and raging against the storm feels kind of feels very indicative, perhaps, of how Shakespeare felt mad and cooped up with all these problems and emotions that you can't do anything about, right? When you can't go outside, and you can't. These things become gigantic. These small demons become colossal. Yeah, it's a fascinating play. It's one of those plays that's so bleak and depressing. It's probably one of his most bleak and depressing plays ever. It's really hard to watch more than once. And yeah, it's so brilliant as well.
And I did see that you had mentioned it earlier, but you do have like a writing boot camp or writing classes, and so tell us about that. How does that work?
Well, that's very kind. Yeah, so I do a lot of editing and writing coaching, and then I realized that my time was limited, and I could only work with so many people. So I was having to turn people away. So I created, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to help as many people as I could. So I created a boot camp on Teacherly, which is like a site, and I interviewed some really interesting creatives and authors, poets, filmmakers, like indie filmmakers, authors, novelists, and got some incredible content from them. And I also unpacked some of my own systems and structures for writing. There are bits of it I would redo now, but you got to leave these things sometimes. But I am still really proud of it, and it's I made it as cheap as I could, so it's like really affordable for people to do. And that's also what the kind of Patreon thing was for me. I think it was a sense that editing is expensive, and I drive my prices down as much as I can, but not everyone can afford a line-by-line edit. It is pricey, especially if you're writing longer books, not novellas. It can really take a chunk out of your bank account. And then there's the time limitation as well. I do get booked up. I'm booked up into the end of January, going into February already. And normally my winter season is quite quiet, so that kind of shows you. And I think a lot of people wrote books in lockdown as well, yeah. So they want them edited now. So the Patreon and the boot camp were kind of methods of reaching more people and making it affordable to those people. And of course, there's no cap on the boot camp or Patreon. As many people as exist on the planet can sign up to that if they wish, to get some insight into writing and structure and architecture, and how those things can improve your writing, as well as line by line stuff and imaginative stuff, and my favorite, occult and esoteric knowledge, which is a really useful thing, especially if you're going into writing that has supernatural elements.
Are there any resources that you use to study and to learn about other subjects and different topics that will improve your writing?
Oh, that's a really, really great question. I mean, I always make a kind of trip, an annual trip to Glastonbury, and they have these amazing bookshops there that have really weird and interesting tomes, and from those you can glean some really interesting information. I am also, subscribed to some I'm a member of subscribed is the wrong word. I'm a member of a group called Let's Get Published, which is a really cool writers mastermind. It's run by my friend Krista, who I mentioned earlier, and and she gets in experts on a kind of bi-monthly basis who deliver talks. I actually did deliver one talk myself, but I'm also a member and recipient of the course. And she got in this incredible editor, Candace Johnson. When was it? It was a couple of months ago. But she is a company called Change It Up Editing, and she's worked for major traditional publishers. And she has so much experience, like more experience than I do. And it was a real pleasure to be on that call and meet a real master. And so I learned a lot that I've now incorporated into my editing practice from that. So as mastermind groups like that, obviously I would recommend the one I'm in. It's really brilliant. But groups like that I think are really great because you get lots of diverse people who share information. And I must say the LGP group is particularly diverse. We've got people from all over the planet on the call, men, women, and everything else. And that variety of perspective is great. And then you have the experts as well who come in. So that's a really good way to enrich your knowledge that's not too time demanding. But also, secondhand bookshops and weird books. Go on the hunt for something esoteric, and who knows, the universe may reward you with an undiscovered gem.
You never know what you'll find.
Oh yeah, it's the joy of it, isn't it? Online shopping is great. I like that too, but there's something super rewarding about seeing that spine of a book on a shelf that just calls to you.
Yeah, exactly. And what makes a character compelling to you?
I would say two things. One answer is quite common. I think a lot of writers would probably say this. I don't know. You can tell me if your other writers have answered this way. A flaw. I think a flaw is really important. I actually think it's interesting. The YA movement was mentioned. Was it by Priscilla?
I think it was book reading, coffee drinking mentioned dystopian YA.
The YA dystopia. That has, I think, produced a bit of a trend of really squeaky clean kind of young characters. And I think I'm much more in the camp of deeply flawed characters working to resolve their flaws. I think as well our culture, they call it the cancel culture. No comment on that, but I think we do have a tendency as a culture to kind of like, oh, you've made a mistake, so now we delete you, rather than this idea of looking for redemption. And I love a good redemption story. I'm just a real sucker for a really bad character who then has a change and does something good. And I think we should question to what extent someone can redeem himself. I think that's a really valid question. So the first one is flaw, and the second one I would say is motivation. And my dad happens to, his business is motivation, and he actually has a really interesting tool called the Motivational Maps, which has kind of used scientific research to ascertain once we get above the level of survival. So if we look at Maslow's pyramid and the hierarchy of needs, we have like survival is like, food, shelter, that trumps everything. But once those needs are met, which for most of us in this world, certainly in this first world, or Western world, they're not synonymous, but you know what I mean. In kind of areas where there are, cities and civilizations, like those needs are met. So then we move to the secondary tier of needs. One need, for example, is the need for expertise. Another is the need for material realizations of success. That's the builder motivator. We have the defender motivator, which is the need for security or predictability, knowing what the future is. So there are 9 motivators, and that's in itself is you could talk for hours about that, because 9 muses of Apollo, 9 Enneagram types. 9 gods in ancient Greece and Egypt. Like you could go and go as to, like, there are 9 energies moving through this world, and so it's not a personality profile. It's I believe the technical term is a self-perception inventory. But basically, it's not a personality profile because it doesn't say you are this. We all have all 9. We all need all 9, but at any one time we can have one that is dominant. So obviously, 1 is the creator motivator, and guess which motivator has remained dominant for most of my life. Yeah. But we have them in an order, and they interact in different ways. And normally your top 3 are quite significant and will interact with each other in different ways. And of course, some motivators conflict. So, for example, the defender, which I mentioned, the need for security and predictability, that conflicts with the creator, because the creator wants to take risks and wants to innovate, which means changing things, which means not being predictable. So if you had, and I know someone who had defender and creator in their top 3, they were always having these moments of indecision and problems. What do I do? Because they're being pulled in 2 different directions. And they didn't have, until they did the map, they didn't have the insight to know why they had these 2 imperatives. So I've just pitched my dad's business, sorry team. But coming back to motivation, real motivation, what is underlying the character? And that's not the same as having a goal. Like a lot of authors, I think, say, oh, well, my character wants to do this. That's not the same. Like, what is the deeper drive, the primary drive? It's more archetypal than that. And I can always tell when you have a character who's really well thought out, because they have these consistent underlying drives, and it takes a really significant, normally traumatic thing to change these drives. So motivation is definitely makes a really compelling character, and because then you get a character who's on a mission from God. I'm a man on a mission or a woman on a mission, and they start to drive the narrative themselves because they have this motivation. They're not just moving around in accordance to what the author dictates the plot needs to happen. It's like, I am going for this. I want this. So that is my answer. Very long-winded. I apologize, but
no, it's great. No, that's what. Yeah, that's what I always hope for is for long answers. So
good.
Yeah. David says, Flawed. Yes, there are no perfect killers.
I must say I'm a sucker for a good serial killer. I write about them a lot, probably too many. And sometimes I might write this time I'm not going to have a killer in my book. And then one normally shows up at some point. But I think that they are almost like, they're a really good example of a motivated character. I mean, motivated in a bad way, right? But they have a very clear drive. Michael Myers is very motivated by, and that's actually in the original Halloween, my favorite line. And there are many good lines in that movie, but my favorite line is when Dr. Loomis says, I watched him for 15 years staring at the wall, but he did not see the wall. He saw only this day. That's a great line. He's seeing the aim. He's seeing the drive. He's seeing, what he wants. And that's all he sees. And just waiting his time. That's really compelling.
That was a great line. And it's funny you say flawed characters, because a lot of the more popular, especially TV series over the last, 10 years, maybe longer, are full of flawed characters, like Tony Soprano, Breaking Bad, Mad Men and even I think to some point, I think Game of Thrones was full of flawed characters that some get redemption and some don't. But so I think that's interesting. I think that is, why are we drawn to flawed characters? There's another question.
Oh yeah, well, again, that's a question I would say I'm probably not qualified to answer in many ways, but it is fascinating, and I think there was a debate on Twitter. I shouldn't risk this, but I'm going to risk it. I'm going to risk it for a chocolate biscuit. There was a debate on Twitter recently about like original sin, and a lot of people saying that it's a load of nonsense and it's child abuse and all this stuff. But I think the concept of original sin is really interesting, because I think from a psychological perspective, it reflects a truth that we feel at some deep level we are flawed and deficient, and there's something we've got to do to make up for that. And so when we see flawed characters, I think we obviously see ourselves in that. And we see, and especially if they're on a redemption arc, like there are kind of, you mentioned a lot of amazing TV series, and I'd add the first series of True Detective to that. The world needs bad men, Marty. We keep the other bad men from the door. And, almost looking at the camera and saying, we are bad characters. We are flawed protagonists, enjoy. And I think when we see them on a redemption arc, we then intuit from that a possibility for our own redemption. And that is something that I think secretly we all crave. And even the most non-religious person, I think deep down, beneath the layers and the intellect, there is a need for salvation, basically. That's why this concept can't ever die, really. It will always have power over us as a species. And I won't make a comment on whether that's good or bad. I'll just, stick to observing the phenomenon. But, I think it is a really powerful thing, and it is something we crave to find. We want more than anything else. We want to feel that there's a chance for us. There's hope, and we can fix the whole. I think there was a Mayan creation story where it talks about the gods of creation making all the animals, but when they get to the humans, they run out of clay. So the human being has a hole in it. And that is the almost their equivalent of the fall, and the original temptation is human beings are flawed in some way. So I've just seen a brilliant comment by David Butcher on the
Yes, Old Testament, a lot of the characters that God picks are deeply flawed, like Jacob, Moses, and Noah.
Yeah. And that, I think, is one of the most fascinating things about the Old Testament, is that if you were writing propaganda, which is often what the Bible is accused of, if you were writing propaganda, you wouldn't create those characters. You would create squeaky clean paragons of, and we there is literature parallel to this where we know it's propaganda. Like Virgil's Aeneid is I love Virgil. I think he wrote some incredible things, but it was propaganda for Rome, and so that's why it will never quite be as good as Homer's epics, right? Because Aeneas is just a bit too squeaky clean, and the whole message of it is very forced and very. Whereas, like when you get to the Old Testament, Jacob, Moses, Noah, Jonah. Jonah is like, you must go and do this thing, and he's like, no, I'm sodding off. I'm going to do my own thing, and then of course he's swallowed by the whale. But the genius of it is in trying to avoid his fate, he fulfills it. Not only because the whale, what happens to spit him out right where he needs to be at the city of Nineveh, I believe, but also because the people of that city would not have believed Jonah had his flesh not been burned white by the acid in the whale's stomach. Now, I mean, this could be a metaphor, so I'm not insisting on the absolute literalism and reality of these events, obviously, but as a psychological metaphor, right, that is, in our life, we're trying to find the right way, but we go the wrong way. We marry the wrong woman, or we do the wrong thing. But then when we look back with a long distance of time, we see, oh, if these things hadn't happened, then none of this would have been possible. And so I think, tangent almost from what Mr. Butcher was saying, but like a really brilliant observation. Yeah, these characters are hugely flawed and they're argumentative and they they don't do what they're told and they fail when they're weak and they easily forget all their promises. But yet something keeps them going and persisting through that, and that is why I guess they've endured and why they're so interesting. And they are striving to be something more than they are. Yeah, deep stuff, man.
It is, yeah. And we talked about it a little. We talked about it a little bit, but do you get inspiration from other forms of media like music or movies or poem or poetry or anything else?
Yeah, I do actually write poetry as well, and I've got a poem coming out in December, an epic narrative poem, epic in length. I won't make a comment as to its quality; that will be for my readers to decide. But epic in length. So I'm really inspired by poetry and music. Absolutely, I'm a great lover of music. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, I like all kinds of music." I do like all kinds of music. I'm particularly a fan of blues, heavy metal, classic rock. I do like some rap as well, and I think rap and poetry have a kind of overlap, especially certain styles of rap, like more lyrical rapping. And I love classical music as well because I'm pretentious like that. But as you can tell, but yeah, I think it's really important actually for authors to put fuel in that is not more writing. And I had a period a couple of years ago where I really burned out because all I was doing was reading and reviewing books and then trying to write novels and trying to write novels, and everything just felt really staid and fixed and stultified, and I couldn't get anything going. And I remember going for a drink with my mates and listening to some music, and then it's like lo and behold, like inspiration started to flow again. So I think it's really important, whether it's visual art or films or music, whatever your kind of preference is. Games like RPG games. I think if you're in a campaign, you're a player or you're running a campaign, if you just try to take your campaign and turn it into a story, it will fail spectacularly because they're not designed for the novel format. But if you can take a moment from it, extrapolate it into a short story, or you can take a series of events and then make something new out of it, great inspiration. I also play Magic the Gathering. I'm a bit of a card nut. And cardboard crack, gotta get that in my veins.
I'm a fellow addict, yeah.
Ah, good man. What colors do you play?
I play I have right next to me, you can't see, it's a big unorganized shelf right next to me with thousands of cards. But I generally gravitate towards black, usually is black or red. I have probably the best. I have an Eldrazi deck that I pull out when I want to be
that's disgusting. That's horrible.
Yeah, it's not good. I like to play Pauper too, because you can build so many all commons. So I do have a poison deck that I'm likewise what I want to be. Yeah,
very ashamed of yourself. Maximum salt content.
Yeah. And Darius, she says, I slept in. Sorry, I'm late. What colors do you gravitate towards?
I do also love black. I play a mono black, and I play Esper as well. I play black, blue, white. Yeah. My current favorite commander deck is a Dakon Blackblade deck. It's really, really good fun. He comes out innocuously, and then he's a 21/21, and he does 21 points of commander damage and just ends the game instantly. It's really, really good fun. But you can get lots of story inspiration. Like I just looking at the card art, I'm like, wow, this is a character. This could be a character in a story. And this almost leads on to a kind of new age esoteric topic, but of like cartomancy. Like if you've got a tarot set, I have one. I have a Miriorama set, which is like a Victorian card game. Where you lay out kind of landscapes, laying those out, shuffling them, rearranging them, sometimes just those images alone can give you great story ideas. So yeah, games are a great way to get story ideas as well. Get the Catan board out, get the Magic the Gathering set out, and it's amazing what can come up.
That's a good point. Yeah, I have a Felidor Sovereign right here in my arm.
Oh, that's so cool.
So when I turned 40, I didn't win though, so I don't know what's going on. Yeah. So hey, Derry, thanks for coming by. And Mr. Morningstar had a question. Do you write and/or read while music is playing?
A very good question. I am a mixture. I do sometimes, if I am playing music while I write, I like it to be music without words. So something very prog rocky or classical music, because I find the words will throw me off. So normally I tend to listen to music beforehand and kind of pump up, like, right, what's the feeling of this scene? Find music that gets me in that zone and then go in. But I have written to music, and there's a song by Max Richter, who is done quite a few film scores. He did Arrival and various others, and he has a song called, I think it's just called Dream 3. And when I wrote Return to the Black Gate, I literally just had that song. It's really hypnotic and slow and melancholy, and I had that on repeat for the entire time. I must have listened to 70 hours of it. I mean, it's just ridiculous, really. But I was so determined to remain in that mode, that feeling, because I wanted the ending to be super sad. So, and it kind of hypnotized me into that state. So, yeah, it's a bit of a mix. I definitely get it though when people say, "Oh, I can't listen to music and write at the same time," and especially since I've started writing more poetry and picking that up again. When I'm writing poetry, it's even more so. I don't listen to the music because you have to feel the meter, and that is a music in and of itself. And if you start interposing a drum beat into that, you're lost. So
it's interesting about music because I recently chatted with Catherine McCarthy, the horror author. And we talked about music, and she was talking about the concerts that she went to in her younger days and things. But we talked a little bit about how the art of the album is almost a lost art form now, because now it's just singles. You just get singles.
Yeah.
And before, you had the experience of getting the record or the CD or whatever it was, the physical media, and having the notes and the lyrics and whatever else was in there. And the order of all the songs was almost like an art form. To put it all together,
absolutely.
Especially concept albums. I mean, it's hard to have a concept album now and get too much attention.
You're so right. It's something I really miss when I listen to new music. And one of my favorite albums of all time is City of Evil by Avenged Sevenfold. Man, it's like nearly 80 minutes long. The songs effortlessly bridge from one to the other, so you can just sit and listen to it for 80 minutes, and there's just no kind of let up. It's conceptual. It takes you on this huge, like, emotional roller coaster. And I just, as you say, it's like you can't really do that. And then, the booklet's got all the crazy art, a million different ways to see a skeleton, but it's still cool, and different fonts, and so much love and work went into that. And I guess that's coming back all the way around to Dark Hilarity. I guess it's kind of why I said it in the 90s. I wanted to homage that, and ridiculous. And some concept albums, when you look at them now, they are ridiculously ostentatious. But like, I love that, and I often say with writing, I'll always take passionate writing that is rough over perfectly edited writing, and I say that as an editor. When that ambition comes through, rather than, we need to make sure it's under 4 minutes long so it will get radio play. No, give me the 8.5 minute ridiculous, with a 4-minute guitar solo in the middle. I'll take that any day.
Totally agree. Yeah, totally agree.
And you see it in you could literally take one band like Sevenfold, and I still love them, but you look at their albums and there's like a slow decrease in the creativity of the album art over time. And it's like really sad to see. And I remember with their album Hail to the King, they they released like a sample of what the cover was going to be, and then they just like chickened out, and then they just did the matte black with a skull in it, and I'm like, no, do the crazy thing, do the skeleton riding the horse, like that's what we want to see, like and I don't know why, I don't know who made that decision, whether it was like an executive or maybe they got backlash, I don't know, but it was like, yeah, there was almost like a moment I thought it was going to revive, and then no, back to you know, doing something a bit more kind of clean.
Yeah.
What a horrible word, clean.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder what that doesn't sound too bad that it would be, you know, out of bounds, or but maybe it just wasn't. They got vetoed somewhere.
There are still some, like I'd say, like book covers are a lot more tame than they used to be as well, and you know, that's partly because the whole process is different, and most people can't afford to get like an artist hand draw it, and you do when you see one that's been done professionally or like in a more slightly more old school style, it's always like, oh, it's just perfect, chef's kiss. But yeah, it is a strange kind of lost art. But I'd say there are still some indie authors and musicians who don't care, and they will have the outrageous kind of like Franz Frazetta, you know, Bikini Woman, or warrior impaling someone, or you know, whatever outrageous thing it is, whether it's sexual or violent or whatever. Like they are still there, and I'll find them on YouTube sometimes, and I'll be like, I have to listen to this just to see if the music stands up to the ostentatious kind of art. And I love it when I discover that. And there was I mentioned S.C. Mendes earlier, and I actually have the special first edition of his Book of the City, which was subsequently banned because it had it's a very occult book, and it's like 3 nude women who are all decapitated and holding their own heads, dancing around like this horrible sigil, and inside the sigil is like a city. It's like amazing cover. And I have it, and it's like a relic now because it was banned. It was deemed too like obscene to publish, and I treasure it signed as well, so even more special.
How was that banned by Amazon, or where was it banned by?
I think so. I think it was. You'd have to ask Bloodbound Books, but I think it was like discontinued. I can get it if you want.
Oh, just out of curiosity, yeah. If you have it.
Why not? There it is.
Oh wow.
S.C. Mendes is the City. Amazing book.
Yeah, wow. Huh.
As you can see, she's holding her own severed head and a sickle. And there's an Ouroboros there as well. Wow. Yeah, phenomenal book. But yeah, that cover no longer exists. The new one is like a fairly simple thing. It's just got a kind of lockbox on it and blood splatter and white on white background. But wow. Give me the weird one. Give me the kind of crazy one.
give me the weird one. And Book Reading Coffee Drinking says it's a similar thing to content of books. Publishers try to push for covers that are following a trend and was popular at the moment of the genre, and everything else ends up looking the same, which is a great point. David says Pink Floyd artwork stands out to me. Dark Side Animals or Wish You Were Here. Even the depth in the white sleeve of the Beatles, the White Album. It's a good point.
All great examples. Derry has said that cover is so cool. Glad you liked it, Derry.
Yeah, it was a cool cover.
When I did my own covers, I really tried to, for Dark Hilarity and The Tunnel, and there's a 3rd book coming next year, I really tried to evoke Tolkien and the original Tolkien cover with the eye. That's kind of what the circle design was, as well as Ende in the Never-Ending Story. Yeah, I tried to kind of, so it is simple, but I really wanted to, and also it's a portal, and it's a portal fantasy as the genre of the book, so I wanted to kind of create a portal on the cover. So yeah, I tried to hark back to that kind of older sort of cover design, but without also breaking my bank account too much. One day. I cannot hear you, my good friend. Is that just me?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I hit the button on accident. David said, decades of debate over the cover of the Abbey Road cover, like Paul in bare feet, Italian symbol for death.
Mm. Yeah, the deep, and that's the thing. A cover is like an opportunity to, give people a taste of what's to come, and use them like visual. The visual image is so powerful. They say a picture says 1,000 words, and it's a cliche, but it is so true. And I know Mendes's cover is loaded with symbolism. We could talk for hours about why it's 3 women, why there's an Ouroboros, the triangle. There's 4 sigils on it, and there's also some Sanskrit text, which I believe I found somewhere what it translated as. Yeah, I mean, there's just layers upon layers upon layers, and then how that all interacts with the story itself. But yeah, the Abbey Road cover is a great example. And that's what covers should do. They should evoke interest, not just conform to a genre formula. A lot of open windows I've noticed. That's something I see a lot. Open windows on covers these days.
Interesting. And Derry says, a cover gives another chance to offer meaning to the content, and the Easter eggs are so satisfying.
Yeah, I think like literal covers are quite disappointing, aren't they? Where they just try to show a character from the book. I mean, it can be great as a writer to see your character realized in artistic form, or like a model, or if it's like a more realism kind of style cover. That can be quite fun, and I won't take that away from any author. But I definitely think going down a more symbolic road is the way to ultimate power.
And do you, speaking of Easter eggs, do you leave Easter eggs in your book for readers to find, or do you leave characters or certain things that happen that span over several books?
Oh yeah. I wrote a huge. So there's a chunk of my books that are all interconnected, and not every Easter egg has yet been found. That was really like a decade's work, really, and I loved it, and I loved leaving those Easter eggs. And when people did find them, it was such a rewarding experience. And I won't say too much, I guess. Just if people do want to plumb the back catalogue, it is a lot of reading, but essentially it's all centered around my Nekia series, which is 3 big books or 5 smaller books, depending on, because there's an omnibus that compiles 3 of them into one. And yeah, there are so many, because it's kind of a multiverse. And I like to think, I was doing the multiverse before it was cool, before everyone was doing it, and Marvel and Rick and Morty and stuff. I love Rick and Morty. But yeah, I was doing a multiverse, and so things that are seemingly unconnected suddenly become connected, and certain characters can go across the multiverse and travel between worlds, and it kind of goes from there. And then there's a wider, so the core Nekia books, you could read them and get a complete story. But then if you actually start diving into some of my novellas and some of my really early books, you'll see familiar faces pop up. No one has yet put together the complete sequence of books and all of the inclusions. There are hints in some of the books where I asterisk certain books on the other books by Joe Sale kind of page. But yeah, there is yet to be a complete Nekia series read through with all the extras included. I won't force it to happen, but if you're watching this and you like big series and big projects to take on, then you have my endorsement.
And book reading coverage against the challenge.
Yes,
that's exactly what I was thinking as you were talking.
Yeah, you just got to use the reverse psychology,
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna find it. Derry says the early Discworld covers were fun to try to identify the elements of the story.
Mm. Terry Pratchett's really fascinating. I find I really enjoy Discworld, and some of those books in particular, like Pyramids and Night Watch, were like master classes in writing, really. And he bent genres. Like, he had this fantasy world, but essentially it was a fantasy world that could just incorporate whatever mechanics he needed. So he has the kind of going postal, so he can do a kind of journalistic narrative, and then he has the Eastern Fringe, where you have the kind of Shaolin monks. So there's a kind of martial arts element to it, and then there's the pyramids. So you can just go across whatever. And then there's the police procedural with the Watch, which is my favorite of the kind of threads. So he just has he's created a universe where he can do whatever genre he wants, basically, which is really awesome. And I think that's why it remains so fresh for so long, because it's all fantasy, but kind of not fantasy, really. He has like there's something called Blue Nose in it, which is like a piss take of Bluetooth, essentially, and they're like these little imps that whisper in your ear. So there's some modern technology is kind of in it as well, really, and commentaries on that. Yeah, it's fascinating, amazing world building.
Haven't read that series yet. It's another one for the list.
That one will take a lifetime.
Yeah, it's a big list. Do you have any plans for fall now that it's the seasons are changing and coming up in that time?
I'm going to a Halloween party, which feels it feels strange after so long in lockdown to turn up in person at an event where there are many people. But we are kind of coming out of it here. Like, the restrictions have all been lifted, and things, touch wood, seem to be kind of improving. So yeah, and I love Halloween. And for the last couple of years, I've not been able to do anything for it, and I always like to kind of let my inner freak out on Halloween. So yeah, that's one big plan. And as I said, like, I've done a lot of book releases, and I do have one more to do in December, but overall, I'm looking to celebrate some of that. And I think it's really important for indie authors. We don't have traditional book launches maybe in shops, and those kind of book tours, we can do them, but we don't have as many of those traditional demarcators of celebration. And it's important to celebrate with friends your victories, and so yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So that's my main fall plan, is to rock up to a genuine Halloween party in costume.
So what are you going dressed up as? What's your costume?
It's really bad. Yeah, some of my friends have really pushed the boundaries of what's acceptable as a Halloween costume. I shouldn't say this, but one of my friends, he came as the ghost of an SS officer. Like, he turned up in full Nazi uniform, and we were all like, he probably shouldn't have done this. This is really bad. Like, and forever, the whole evening, people were avoiding being in pictures with him. And he got a talking to afterwards. But from his view, he's like, well, what could be more evil? I was like, well, fair enough, I guess.
Yeah,
I guess if that's your view, like, it's the right reason to dress as one, I guess. But yeah, like, there's been some boundary crossing ones. So I'm coming as a corporate businessman, because that is the ultimate horror of the modern world. So yeah, I'm basically dressing up as a fucking tech guru. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear. I was doing so well.
You're fine. No, you're fine. Priscilla says, as a Halloween party, it feel awkward. I think I forgot how to do small talk.
I feel your pain, Priscilla. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, it is a whole. It's funny how over the course of the last couple of years, things have changed so much.
I think a lot of Zoom calls and stuff, and like, the chat we're having now, that there is a kind of structure and expectation, and or an activity, or so we're used to that. And when it's just like free roam, free for all, it's a little more yeah, a little more challenging, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And Derry says, is it tempting to go as one of your own characters? That's a good question.
That's a really good question. I feel like that would be, my friends would never let me live that down. I feel they would accuse me of hubris and arrogance and never forgive me. They already joke about how often I bring up my books, or like, he's just casually raised the fact he's an author to someone. But it's a good question, because a lot of I think, similar to an actor, actors often say that like every character they play is themselves or a piece of themselves, and I think a lot of my characters are, or any author's characters are, kind of based on themselves. And again, I shouldn't go into this, but another controversial debate that was happening on Twitter, and it's always controversial on Twitter, was like, we need to do away with this idea that fiction is autobiographical. But the thing is, when a story emerges from your own psyche, you cannot help but leave your own imprint on it. And we all are tapping into parts of ourselves, however repressed or however remote, and we all have these intrusive thoughts. And I'm not ashamed to admit that Craig Smiley, who is the villain of The Black Gate and the driving force of it, there is a lot of myself in him. Obviously, I'm not a serial killer, but his mania, his obsession, his bipolar, his ups and downs, manic highs of elation and zeal and jubilation, and then these crushing pitfalls. That was very much where I was at the time, with these wild mood swings. And so reflecting that in his trials and tribulations and his road to kind of try and redeem himself in some way. So yeah, like, is it tempting to go as one of your own characters? Yes, because I guess I am my own characters, and some of them more than others. Craig in particular, I think, is sadly to say, the evil anti-hero is probably the closest I've come to writing about myself. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Book reading, coffee drinking says, quote, obviously I'm not a serial killer, unquote. Sounds like something a serial killer would say.
Sorry, I just need to write down your name and address on a piece of paper next to some other names and addresses. No reason particularly, but
No reason. Yeah.
on my hit list.
Yeah. You got to be careful out there.
You do.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And what was your first job?
Oh my God. Technically, my first job was washing dishes at a company that delivered meals, did like healthy meals delivered to your door. That was like my work experience. I have had a range of jobs. I did a lot of work when I got out of uni on the phone. I did a job working for a prepaid card company that was supplying some tech to a festival in London. And that was mad. That was a small company, and I did everything. I was like in every department. You just mucked in. It was really crazy. And I've worked for a medical products company. I worked for a company that fixed ovens in a call center. And call center work, man, is so brutal. There is nothing like it on planet Earth. It will destroy you.
Wow.
To be made of steel to do it. So, but yeah, my first true job was washing dishes, and I like to think I'm pretty good at washing dishes. It was useful experience.
And Derry has a great question. Have you ever met anyone so unusual that if you wrote them, they would be unbelievable?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, G.K. Chesterton once said, the difference between fiction and reality is that fiction has to be credible. And I think that's so bang on. So many, my friends alone, I've mentioned them a few times, and it's one of the great blessings of my life, really, that I've had this incredible group of friends who have kept me going. We've all supported each other. And so I'm very indebted to them. But they also are such a crazy cast of characters. If I wrote about them earnestly, I don't think anyone would ever believe what I wrote. So I have to kind of take elements of them and insert them. There's a character in the Black Gate trilogy who is directly named after one of my friends called Dr. Monaghan. And I mean, he's like a crazy weapons scientist who goes on a rampage, but in many ways, he's almost tamer than the original. And that's yeah, a great blessing. But as you say, Derry, it does come with the problem of how do I make people believe this character? Certainly, I think a lot of authors have that problem, that some of the events or people they meet in their life is too strange for fiction.
Yeah, definitely. And Dory says call center work is soul destroying, and I agree 100%. That is a tough job.
Have you done it as well?
Yeah, for about a month or two. It was. I would rather do anything else in the world than do that again.
Yeah,
So
I did 6 months. I hit rock bottom financially, and I quit a previous job to start a publishing venture that then failed, and then had to just get any job I could. And I got this call center job, and I was taking 150 phone calls a day, which, if you do the math, is savage. They told me when and when not I could go to the toilet. They had crazy rules in place, and even though it was just fixing ovens, I heard some crazy things on those calls, man. I had a hostage situation once on a call.
Oh, really? Hostage?
Yeah.
Wow.
Somebody, one of our engineers went out to fix an oven, and it was an oven, I won't say where, but like a very popular kind of high street fast food place. And they were doing like probably like 20 to 30K of business a day.
Wow.
And it was entirely dependent on this oven. And the oven had a major fault with it. The engineer went out. Basically, as soon as he arrived on site, the thing fell to pieces and couldn't be repaired. It was ancient. This thing was like 20 years old. And the owner, got it into his head that the engineer had broken his oven permanently. Like, it had a fault, but then it was now permanently out of action. And it would be like several weeks to get a replacement, which would cost him, if you do the math, like, $500,000 or maybe more.
Wow.
So he barricaded the engineer in the shop or the takeout place, and he wouldn't let him leave until he got his oven guaranteed delivered next day.
Wow.
And I had to, and no one else, everyone else had clocked off. It was my last call of the day. I was on the late shift. It was literally 1 minute to the call came through. I took it. And I was there until very, very late, negotiating with this guy. And I remember coming in the next day, and my boss was like, basically chewed me out because I'd had like an hour and a half. They measure you on how quickly you resolve the calls. Right. So you're supposed to do it in 3 minutes. Well, this thing was like an hour, like maybe more. And so she was chewing me out for this. And I was like, why don't you listen to the call? And so she went and she listened to it. And then, to be fair to her, she then did, was like, okay, fair play to you. That must have been really tough. And but get back to work now. We've wasted enough time talking. But yeah, crazy experience. And I've written like one short story set in a call center, and in the back of my mind, I've thought that maybe I would revisit it one time. I mean, that story alone is just so mad. That could become something, but it's almost too painful to revisit.
Yeah, that is tough. That was a great story. And it was 1 minute till. That's.
Yeah, I was like, if I just waited 1 minute, phone lines. But then, the engineer would have been stuck with this nutter and would have had no one to call, because I was the last person in the office. So I was responsible for closing down and locking up on the late shift. So, and it shows you how flawed all these systems are. Like, really, it was a good thing I did pick it up in a sense. Yeah, it was a strange, and you know that line, like we don't negotiate with terrorists. There was a real moral quandary because I was like, I feel like I have to now partially give in to this guy's demands because otherwise, who knows what's going to happen to the engineer? And
Yeah.
I didn't know if he was really capable of like violence or anything, but he had locked him in. So I was like, well, if he's gone that far, and the engineer called me as well and was like, I don't feel safe, but he hasn't done anything yet, but I can't get out. It was like a super weird situation. And yeah, you feel bad giving into I felt bad giving into the owner's demands because I'm like, I'm rewarding him doing the wrong thing, but then I'm doing that only to liberate the engineer. So it's hostage situations are messed up, and negotiating with terrorists is messed up as a process. So it gave you a lot of fuel for themes and psychology in books, certainly.
Well, no pressure on that phone call, right? That's a tough one. And David has a question. What was your degree in?
A bit boring in terms of an author's answer, but I did actually do a degree in creative writing. It was about 60% literature, English lit, and then about 40% creative. It was like the only uni that would accept me, and all the other options I applied to was pure lit. And then I got onto this English with creative writing at Birmingham, and it's just amazing. It was such a great experience. And unlike most people at unis nowadays who are in a class of 400, there were 40 of us on the creative writing. So we got a lot more time with the lecturers, and I learned so much. And not just from the lecturers, but I learned a lot from my fellow students. And a lot of us were still friends now and share work. And some of them have gone on to way more success than I have. Done really, really well, and it's really great to see. So, yeah, as it happens, I would love to say like I did a degree in crime or some kind of crazy tangential thing, but actually, I am a kind of literature student through and through, I guess. And I guess that you kind of can see that in my writing. I always try to avoid what Richard Thomas, a brilliant writer, he always said, I hate writers writing about writing. And that kind of navel gazing. Sorry, I bet
Right.
tongue
Yeah.
navel gazing.
I never get it right either. Yeah.
But where you're just a writer writing about writers doing, that it is a bit pretentious. So I always try to steer clear of that, write about real experience, real issues, real problems that human beings face in life, real challenges. But at the same time, I do love literature and I love poetry, and I have a thirst to study it and really break it down and how does the language work. And I think that does come across in my prose. There is a slightly more kind of literary bent to it, but hopefully without being off-putting or pretentious or anything like that. But yes.
Interesting. Yeah. I thought you may have pursued a degree in crime or hostage negotiation after that.
It's funny. I don't know if you've ever asked yourself this question of like, what would I have done if I didn't do what I do, and what's that road not taken? And I think for me, I would have been like a PI or something. I think if I hadn't gone into writing, I think that's where I was going. And as I said, I like to investigate things and study them and break them down. And I think I have at least some of the skills that would have been useful for a PI, probably a lot more than I would need. But and I'm kind of fascinated by detective work and by detectives. And I did at one point get an offer from the police to actually become a kind of a junior investigator when I was job hunting. And I avoided it in the end because I was like, I am going to do the writing. I am going to commit to that and stuff. But yeah, that feels like my road not taken, funnily enough. You say that kind of crime and particularly being a private investigator, someone who is not outside the bounds of the law, but somebody who's not restrained by the same hierarchies. But I don't know, what about you? Do you think there's a road not taken?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I was actually a criminal justice major in college, and
Oh,
I
awesome.
didn't I didn't pursue it. So I don't know, 10 years later, I kind of got the itch, and I wondered if I should have pursued it. You kind of wonder, am I making the right decisions? Because I was in IT, I was doing IT stuff.
Mm.
So I thought, well, let me look into it and see what I can find. And I actually had a job as a PI for a little while, but it was yeah,
No.
but it was like health insurance stuff. It wasn't anything too exciting, but
Oh.
so I did did a lot of surveillance, and uh, so it's it was a very interesting interesting
Mm.
experience because I learned a lot of things, but your neighbors will, because we had to canvas the area, so we would go
Mm.
if we thought you were trying to commit fraud, we would talk to your neighbors and say, come up with some kind of story and try and get information about when you're home, and your neighbors will they will tell you anything that you want to hear if you have the right story.
Wow.
And so we would follow people and take pictures of that, and it was a it sounds exciting, but it was probably 98% boring, just sitting in your car
Waiting.
waiting, and about
Mm.
1 or 2% excitement. So it was very interesting. But yeah, it's funny because I still wonder if people are following me even 15, 10,
Wow.
15 years later, because it still sticks in my head. So I still, if there's a car that's following me, I'll if I get this feeling like I'm being followed. So it's funny how those things stick with you
Yeah.
always.
When you know the techniques, right? Then it
Yeah.
and there's that scene in Munich in Spielberg film where he uses all these ways to surveil people, and then
Mhm.
at the very end he goes through his own house and he cuts open the bed, and he all the ways that he used, he then gets paranoid about are being used on him. That's fascinating. You did that, man. And yeah, surveillance is another one of those moral things that's really tricky. If you're trying to catch somebody who's done something wrong, then like that's a good thing. But then it
Mhm.
it feels a bit. I imagine it feels a bit icky. I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, it
yeah.
wasn't for me. but but yes, yeah, definitely. And that scene from Munich was, I thought, was perfect, because when I
Mm,
saw that, it kind of gave me the chills because it was so well done, and I think I can see that happening. And what I did was it was nothing compared to what
mm.
the story was about in Munich. But yeah, so it was an interesting experience. But I did learn to trust my gut,
Mm.
because there were times when there were some people who it was their income to commit fraud. So
Wow.
they knew they were being watched. They knew that they were going to we'd be watching them. So we had some people who would get in their car and they would drive around the block to see if anyone would follow them, because they knew
Wow.
they were being watched. So you had to be really careful about when to take a chance, when not to take a chance, and you just had to
Mm.
trust your instincts. But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. But
Yeah.
after that experience, I was, yeah, this isn't for me. So I kind of closed that chapter. But book reading, coffee drinking says neighbors love to gossip. Yes, they do.
Mm.
Definitely.
You want to know what they say about you, but you also don't want to know what
Yeah,
they say
I,
about
I
you. It's a double-edged
I
sword.
don't want to know what they say about me.
Yeah, I imagine they hate my music taste, man.
Yeah.
If they didn't when I started, they do now.
Yeah.
When they've heard that same song on repeat for 70 hours in order to write a book. Yeah.
You're the crazy guy next door. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a yogi as well. I do a lot of yoga, and that's a whole topic to get into, and how that also connects to magic in a really interesting way. But
Mm.
um, yeah, sometimes like your neighbor just happens to go past the window when you're in a compromising position, and you just wave at them, but they're like, "Yeah, you're a complete weirdo, complete psychopath."
Yeah.
Um, I try not to do it near windows, and but we're only in a small flat and we're on the ground floor, so it's a bit more difficult to avoid it. So yeah, I have at times definitely shocked some of the nice normal people who live near me.
Yeah. Well, at least they'll leave you alone now. I mean, they won't.
That's always an advantage, definitely.
That's one advantage. But Joseph, thanks so much for coming by. I didn't realize how long it's been, but I'm sure we could talk for hours. Yeah. But I did leave links to all of your books and your website down below in the description, so everyone can go
Thank you.
check them out. But thanks so much. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a real pleasure, and you've been an incredibly generous host and brilliant questions. And I think we got into some really deep stuff. And thanks to the chat for contributing as well. It means a lot for an indie author when people come out to check you out and ask questions and engage. It's been really awesome, man. This is crowned my week. This has been more than made my week. It's kind of made my month, made my year. So thank you so much.
That's so great. And it's funny because I have this book in front of me that I write all my questions down on. So I have many more questions to ask you. So whenever, you had to get to all my questions, but whenever you want to come by again, let me know, and we'll figure out a time in a day.
That's super generous. I was going to say if you would ever have me again, I'd be more than welcome. And then you've extended the invite. So bless you, sir. It would be my pleasure. Absolutely. It's great to meet people in the community and speak face to face and chew the cud on great books. I had a kind of a list of books I wanted to talk about, not my own, but like friends and indie authors I wanted to support, and I've not ticked off half of them. So
that was actually that was going to be one of my questions is books you've enjoyed and underappreciated books. And so I have a ton more questions to ask you. So let's find a time and we'll make it work.
Legendary. I'm so grateful, man.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks again to everyone in the chat for coming by and saying hello and interacting with us. It's been a great time. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.